Hello everyone, this is part 8 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto, Gaara, and Tayuya entered the large stone room after an unnecessarily long climb up to the top floor of the tower. It would make much more sense to hold the meeting lower down the large building. Both Naruto and Tayuya were grumbling thoughts consistent with this as they entered through the spacious doors whilst Gaara remained his impassive self. While he was complaining on the outside, Naruto was much happier to see that Tayuya was just being herself and that the curse mark hadn't affected her. They had been surprised when Kakashi told them that the exams were starting so soon, considering this portion was supposed to last 5 days. Naruto and Tayuya had only been unconscious for a day, but apparently half the genin teams had already made it into the tower, so they decided to just move right ahead. They joined the throng of other genin who had passed this portion of the test, and Naruto idly noticed that there couldn't have been more than 6 teams. With a slight panic, he noticed that Temari and Kankuro were nowhere to be seen. This worried him greatly. He nudged Gaara, who only nodded, obviously having noticed this fact himself. I would not worry, even if they failed in this portion of the exam, they can handle themselves well enough. Naruto nodded slowly, trying to calm himself, but his thoughts were a bit wilder. He feared that perhaps Orochimaru had gotten to their friends. Then again, Kakashi had told him that they knew about him, so the Sannin would be foolish to stay. Even so, he held on to his worries until Tayuya shot him a particularly peeved look. Stop sweating it, shithead. You know Temari probably underestimated some shrimp of a genin and paid for it. Naruto smiled, once again happy to see Tayuya acting like Tayuya. Despite them sharing an almost sisterly bond, there was always an inexplicable animosity between the two girls. Naruto had never understood why they were always so competitive with one another, like they had been wronged in some other life. He had always just passed it off as a girl thing and moved on. At least it was a sign that things were still normal. He glanced around the room as everybody formed up into rows, awaiting the Hokage and his speech. He checked out the other teams that had made it through curiously. Strangely enough, there was the team that they had found Orochimaru attacking. All 3 members looked suitably haggard. More than anything else though, the black-haired boy looked perpetually angered, while the other male in the group shared the same stoicism as Gaara. He also noticed the sound team from before had made it through, not looking particularly troubled by it. There were a few of the Konoha teams as well, one with a tall bored-looking kid, a blonde girl with dazzling blue eyes, and a boy whose hands never seemed to be too far from food. There was also Hinata and Kiba's team, which Naruto smiled at. He was glad they made it through. Finally, there was a third Leaf team, one that seemed older than the rest but only slightly. It contained a tall boy with the same pale eyes as Hinata, possibly some relation, an equally tall boy with a shiny black bowl cut and amazingly bushy eyebrows, as well as a girl whose hair gave her the resemblance of a panda. He was distracted from his musings as the Hokage finally appeared before the successful teams. He extended his arms as he spoke, but Naruto wasn't really listening to what he said, still lost in his own thoughts over the events in the forest. He finally perked up when he heard their latest proctor finally chip in, a sickly-looking man with pale skin and many bags under his eyes. He smirked at the resounding groans that echoed through the room as he explained the need for a preliminary round. While it did seem somewhat unfair they were given no rest before these matches, Naruto at least understood that in the field their enemies were not going to extend them such courtesies. Anyway, it was fair enough that the teams who had performed better and faster in the last rounds received more of a rest. He could plainly see that teams like the Uchihas were fairly worn out by the general appearance and attitude. The proctor, Hayat, finished explaining the system for the matches and everybody looked up expectantly towards the name selection screen. Ino Yamanaka clearly appeared and Naruto quickly worked out that this was the blonde girl he had noticed before from her dejected appearance. The order meant very little to him, if anything the sooner the better, as even though the longer it lasted the more rest he would receive. The same could be said for his opponent. Finally, Sakura Haruno appeared and everybody else retired from the arena to the catwalks on either side. Naruto only stood to watch the 2 combatants momentarily as they squared off, noting with a semi-interested look that the pink-haired girl's hair was shorter than before. After that he moved to the back of the catwalk and sat down in a meditative position, blocking out the sights around him. He kept his senses of hearing and smell open and receptive for when his name was called, but other than that he blocked everything out. Tayuya smirked as she saw Naruto begin to meditate. He would always do this right before a fight if he got the chance. He tried to explain to her once that being in the right mindset could help you in a fight, but she was more of an instinct fighter. Tactics came on the fly to her, and that was how she liked it. Anyway, all that sitting still for ages crap really annoyed her. No, if she were to meditate it would only make her irritable. Once Naruto had understood that, he quickly stopped trying to teach her. Gaara also noticed but said nothing. Tayuya eyed the quiet boy curiously. He seemed extra pensive recently. She didn't know if it was about her getting the curse mark. He tended to be a bit overprotective sometimes, or from meeting his father's murderer. Perhaps he was just being a moody git. She smirked at that. Gaara was always moody, well, except for when he was around Naruto and her. She decided to watch the first fight but quickly grew disinterested with the pansy display of skills the two supposed kunoichi were putting on. She wondered how they even passed their genin exams. She chalked it up to Konoha making them easy. It made her smile thinking about those two going through the sooner genin exams. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Out of the corner of her eye she noticed the bored-looking kid eye her up. He masked it well, but he was obviously trying to get a read on her and possibly her skills. See something you like, pineapple head? The boy averted his gaze with a scowl, muttering something Tayuya couldn't quite hear while his tubby friend just laughed at him. Tayuya plopped herself down next to Naruto, still calmly looking ahead with his eyes closed. She knew he could still hear her. In fact, in this state he could probably hear everything in the room. He said, "What a drag." Tayuya was startled as Naruto suddenly spoke up, still sitting perfectly still, although he briefly smirked. "So fucking what? Like I care what some pussy leaf nin says." Naruto didn't reply and Tayuya scowled. Nevertheless she didn't move. In fact she scooted a bit closer to him. It was rather cold in the spacious room, and once again Naruto was displaying his admirable qualities as her personal heater. Deciding there was once again nothing else to do, she turned her attention back to the fight at hand, just in time to see the two Konoha nin knock each other out, resulting in a draw. She looked on expectantly at the names board just like everybody else, except Naruto of course, to see if she was next up to fight. She hoped she would be soon, as she just wanted to get it over and done with. The more challenging it was the better. It was always helpful to know where her weaknesses were. Thanks to Naruto she knew one of them was her taijutsu, although she had been improving that. Thanks to Gaara she also knew one was impenetrable, never-ending walls of sand, although she didn't think that would be a concern here. She groaned when her name didn't show up. Instead it was the pineapple-haired boy who had been staring at her, who she now knew to be called Shikamaru. Next up on the board was somebody called Kintsuchi, the female member of the Sound Village's genin. She decided that this match might be more interesting than the last. She was curious to see these Sound Nin in action, and this was her first chance. So what do you think of all this so far? Naruto stared at the large fox in front of him, who merely stared back with her large black eyes. Her long tail swished mesmerizingly slowly behind her lithe body, each like its own organism. Although it was unnecessary and Naruto knew it was some kind of illusion, Kyubi seemed to grow with him over the years. If such a thing existed, she now looked more like a teenager, for a fox that is. Concerning the exams or for your girlfriend? Naruto bit back his scathing retort, knowing it would do him no good. Kyubi was always trying to rile him up, Tayuya being a particularly used method to do so. Both. Kyubi looked thoughtful for a moment, using one of her tails to scratch under her chin, imitating the way men with long beards might stroke their facial hair. Naruto stifled his laugh and waited patiently for her to come to some kind of opinion. I'd say you performed sufficiently so far, although you would do well not to underestimate anybody here. Naruto nodded in an exasperated manner. It wasn't the first time he had received that advice. Other than that, the encounter with this Orochimaru character seemed oddly coincidental. Naruto looked at her curiously, waiting for her to continue. Instead of doing so, the large fox just lazily looked around the imaginary clearing. What do you mean? Kyubi looked up quickly, but with a disinterested, lidded gaze that told him she was barely even paying attention. Oh what? Naruto sighed, but he saw the smirk that briefly graced Kyubi's muzzle. It made her day to get under his skin, and both of them knew it. Oddly coincidental. Orochimaru. Kyubi observed him for a moment with those same bored eyes before nodding slowly. Yes, well, I am merely pointing out that it was strange for you to encounter him again, especially when it would suit him better to keep anybody with the possibility of recognizing him far away. He doesn't seem the type to make mistakes such as being unaware you were attending the exams. Naruto absorbed the new information, having come to a similar conclusion on his own. So he wanted us to be there. Kyubi neither nodded nor shook her head, once again glancing around the clearing, no doubt looking for a rabbit or hare to chase. Perhaps, perhaps not. I do not pretend to know the inner workings of the man, but like I said, he seems the type to have plans within plans. If I were to hazard a guess, I would say he was gauging your abilities. Naruto nodded slowly, but his mouth was set to the side as he thought on it a moment. I don't know, he seemed mainly concerned with the Uchiha kid. It was Kyubi's turn to nod. Yes, obviously the intended target of that cursed mark. Naruto scowled at hearing that. It wasn't really the Uchiha's fault that Tayuya received the mark, but he was the one she had been defending. What do you know about that, by the way? The mark. Naruto nodded his agreement, and Kyubi took to her thoughtful stance, once again using her tail to imitate the hilarious action. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle despite the serious nature of their conversation. Less than I would like to admit, the human practice of fuinjutsu always confounded me. She looked irritated as she stared off to one side of the clearing. Perhaps if I paid more attention I would not be in this situation with you, Kit. Naruto just shrugged. Kyubi's ceiling by the fourth was always a sore topic. So there's nothing you can do to help Tayuya. Kyubi shook her head, although Naruto noticed there wasn't much remorse in the action. Suddenly he cringed a little, hearing the dull thump through his extended senses as the sound Nin's head impacted painfully with the wall of the arena. Both Kyubi and Naruto waited a moment to hear who would be next. It was somebody named Zaku Abumi and Shino Aburame. Tayuya was boredly banging her head against the wall she was leaning against. The second match had been somewhat interesting. She didn't know that there were jutsus to control people's shadows. However, after that they had gotten increasingly lame. The bug user had ended his match fairly quickly, then the fat kid had been knocked out in seconds by the Dosu guy. She was suddenly startled as Naruto stood up from his seated position, stretching out his limbs and rolling his neck once. So what did she say? Naruto looked down at her, trying to hide the amusement from his face. She looked a lot more shy than usual. He helped her up with a hand and noticed that she held onto it for a few seconds after she was standing. Sorry, Kyubi didn't know anything about it. She looked down, both saddened and annoyed by the news, and he lightly tugged her chin back up to face him. Hey, you know I meant it when I said I was going to find a way to get that thing off of you, right? Her eyes narrowed briefly and he thought she was just going to slug him. She relaxed, however, and looked away, forcing his hand away from her chin and hiding the slight blush that had spread to her cheeks. Whatever. Naruto was about to drive his point home when he heard an excited squeak coming from his left. He looked over to see that Hinata's name had come up on the selection board, followed by a Neji Hyuga. At least he was right about the relation. Tayuya was already moving away from him to go and stand by Gaara. She was obviously annoyed that Kyubi couldn't help, so he gave her time to calm down. He turned to watch the two Hyugas down on the arena floor, deciding that this match might at least be interesting. They eyed each other, quite literally, with their Kekkei Genkai activated. Each was examining the other for some kind of weakness. Then, through an unspoken agreement, it started. It was so sudden that one might have completely missed it if they blinked. Both threw themselves forward with their hands darting backwards and forwards in well-rehearsed katas. Naruto quickly realized that both of them had the exact same fighting style, a strange non-impacting style that seemed to work off of lightning-fast glancing blows. Blue light briefly flared after each of their attacks, and whilst neither of them seemed to actually land a single hit, Naruto intrinsically knew that even one of those blows could potentially be deadly. He looked around, momentarily taking his attention off of the dance-like fight until he spotted the strangely dressed woman from before. You're Hinata's sensei, am I right? The dark-haired woman looked down at him with her startling red eyes, merely looking at him curiously. Yes, I am Kurenai Yuhi. Naruto nodded politely and the woman smiled out of the corner of her mouth. Could you explain their style? I understand that it works off of some kind of chakra manipulation, but other than that. He left the sentence trailing, showing his lack of knowledge on the subject. Kurenai merely smirked, always happy to inform somebody of her prized student's abilities. It is called the Gentle Fist. It is their family style, relying on their Byakugan. Once again Naruto nodded, familiar with the ability, few ninja weren't familiarized with the impressive dojutsu. Their ability to see the chakra network of their opponent allows them to see and attack the specific tenketsu in their body, blocking them if need be with precise chakra-infused blows. Naruto smiled, looking down at the display of deadly yet beautiful force the two genin were putting on. 8 trigrams 32 palms. The cry rang out across the arena and Naruto pulled his full attention back towards the fight, as did Kurenai. He turned in time to see Hinata rush at Neji with her hands a blur. After each attempted blow she would call out a number, doubling it each time until she reached 32. Neji did his best to defend against the blows but they came startlingly fast. A few broke through his defenses and with each one it was plain he was weakening. Rotation. The call was equally loud as Hinata's own and before she could land even one of the last 32 strikes Neji erupted into a sphere of spinning chakra. Unfortunately Hinata was close, about to land her blows in, and was caught up in the defense attack. She was struck harshly by the eruption of chakra and was sent hurtling back across the arena to impact with the concrete wall with a thud. Naruto watched on with wide eyes. The last attack astounded him and he instantly wondered how Neji performed it. When the sphere of blue light finally died down and Neji looked across the room to see that Hinata was not getting up, he smirked. While your Juoken is impressive, cousin, you should know better than to think you could defeat me. We all have our fates and yours was to be defeated here by me. He practically spat the words at the girl, making Naruto furrow his brow. He wondered how the boy could be so cold to his own family. Deep down Naruto knew that he should be thankful he even had a family, but he ignored the depressing thoughts that would surely follow. He looked back over the fight and smiled inwardly. Despite losing, Hinata had fought with ferocity and determination. It seemed that what she had told him about stepping up her training was true. Briefly it warmed him to think that he had something to do with that, even if he didn't even know it at the time. It also made him wonder just what she might be like if he had never left, if she would still have this level of ability or natural confidence and determination. It was just one of those things he would never know, not that he regretted the choice in the slightest. He smiled while looking at Tayuya and Gaara. He turned his attention up to the board to see who the next fighters would be. Despite his calm outwards appearance, he was becoming slightly agitated that he had not yet come up. Once again he was disappointed as Sasuke Uchiha and Kiba Inuzuka flashed across the screen. However, a smirk managed to grace his lips. He was curious to see how Kiba fought and wondered how it would compare to the display of taijutsu he had seen from Sasuke in the forest. The two fighters jumped down into the arena, one looking a mix between annoyance and indifference and the other excitement and confidence. Naruto couldn't help but smile at the display of cockiness Kiba put on to further irritate the Uchiha. He only hoped that he had the skills to back up his comments. At least Naruto knew who he was rooting for in this fight, while at the same time he would be analyzing both fighters. He knew that if he survived this round he might face the winner of this match. There was none of the quiet contemplation and sizing up the two Hyugas had used when Heian jumped backwards. Sasuke immediately launched himself at Kiba, a flurry of fists that the Inuzuka seemed actually strained to dodge. Eventually he received a moment of respite when he slid underneath Sasuke's legs. It gave him enough time to pull off his clansman beast clone. Immediately the canine-esque boy was on the offensive, however Sasuke seemed competent enough, taking on two opponents as he was at fighting one. Even so, he was given no room to counter the blazingly fast strikes that came in perfect tandem from Kiba and Akamaru. This continued for roughly a minute, with Sasuke perfectly defending himself and the Kiba twins launching blinding attacks one after the other. Naruto saw the shift in the battle as soon as it happened. Kiba took a moment to rest after so many strenuous attacks. Sasuke immediately took advantage of the respite and with a few quick hand seals he let loose a cascade of fire from his lungs. Everybody looked on, slightly awed that a genin had enough chakra and skill to actually use the fireball jutsu. Naruto also looked towards the end of the room that was now veiled in smoke, worried for the boy inside. Fang over fang. Naruto let out a barely perceptible sigh as both Kiba and Akamaru erupted from the smoke, spinning like drill heads. Sasuke only dodged in time to avoid losing an arm from the sudden and ferocious attack. As it was, he lost some of the fabric from his shirt. He sprang out from his tucked roll only to immediately dodge again as the two spinning Inuzukas ricocheted off of any surface they encountered, right back at the now hard-pressed Uchiha. Naruto watched in genuine interest as the room soon became a battlefield from the surprisingly effective combo attack. Anywhere they struck would receive a small crater that only began to tell of how painful the attack would be if it hit home. Unfortunately, it seemed it was either a strenuous or chakra-consuming attack, as both Kiba and Akamaru stopped after about 30 seconds. Both of them looked as tired as the other, but there was still the determined spark in their eyes. Sasuke didn't look much better. Kiba had scored a few glancing blows, and with the violent rotations of his attack that meant a few cuts had appeared. Sasuke for his part merely looked annoyed at the whole experience, not losing his confident stance for a moment. Before either of them received any rest, he once again launched himself at the tired Inuzuka, engaging him in relentless taijutsu. Kiba held his own, but it was painfully obvious that he was tiring, quickly, and would last much longer. The instrumental moment came as he left his defenses open for just a moment and Sasuke delivered a vicious kick to his side. Sasuke winded Kiba long enough to follow up with a few punches and another spinning kick to the jaw. At this point Kiba was barely standing, and the only thing that saved him from being smashed across the room was Sasuke suddenly wincing in pain. Everybody was confused at the outcry until they looked down and saw Akamaru firmly fastened on Sasuke's leg, blood dripping from where tooth met skin. Sasuke sneered at the pup in anger and lashed out with his other foot, sending the Ninken flying across the room to impact with the wall with a sickening crunch. Kiba's eyes shot open from his position across from Sasuke. Akamaru. He was about to run across to where his dog lay on the ground underneath the small crater in the wall he had made, but Sasuke beat him to it. Seeing that the Inuzuka was about to make a move, Sasuke quickly finished him off with a curt but painful kick to the back of the head. Kiba slumped with a dull thud to the ground, unconscious. Sasuke seemed quite pleased with himself at his victory, while Naruto couldn't have been angrier. He launched himself over the railing down to the floor to stand across from the smirking Uchiha, fists already balled up. What the hell are you doing? Sasuke turned to him, annoyance and slight confusion on his features at the seething shinobi across from him. What are you talking about? Naruto's mouth twisted into a snarl. He wasn't attacking you, he was just going to see if his partner was okay. Sasuke only spared a bored glancing look between the knocked-out dog and his equally unconscious partner before shrugging carelessly. Whatever. Naruto was honestly about to slug him right in his pretentious jaw before he felt a hand grab his fist, holding it back. He turned angrily only to see Tayuya looking at him sternly. We don't have time for this, Naruto. Mutt and his dog will be fine, just leave it. Naruto was caught off guard by Tayuya actually using his name that he let her lead him across the room before he tore his hand out of her grasp. He moved away from her and she was about to go and get him again, fearing that he would start a fight with the Uchiha. She let him go when she saw where he was actually going. Naruto jogged over to where Akamaru lay limply on the ground and carefully picked the small dog up. It moved in its sleep, nestling into Naruto's arms as he walked across the concrete arena to where the paramedics were just lifting Kiba onto a stretcher. The medics were wary about letting Naruto approach their patient, but all he did was carefully place Akamaru on the unconscious boy's chest before walking back up into the viewing area with Tayuya. At least he would have if her name hadn't been the next to appear on the selection screen. Huh. Well, I'll see you in a few seconds then, shithead. She grinned at him cockily and he smiled back, momentarily forgetting the anger Sasuke had caused him. She walked back out into the arena while Naruto carried on up the stairs, both of their eyes glued on the screen for the next opponent. Yes. I will make you proud in this fight, Guy-sensei. Naruto looked across at the strange spandex-wearing boy from before, Tayuya's next opponent. I know you will make me proud, Lee. Let your youth burn bright. Naruto wasn't sure whether or not to be appalled or amused as the larger version of the kid he now knew to be called Lee punched his student down into the arena for writing his words down in a small notebook. Tayuya seemed equally weirded out by the whole affair, cautiously dropping into a taijutsu stance in case it was all a ruse to make her lower her guard. Taijutsu wasn't exactly her specialty, but it would do well to get a feel for her opponent's abilities. Lee seemed to get over a small crying fit his sensei caused and turned to face his latest opponent. Yosh. Truly I have found a most beautiful and fair challenger this day. Everybody's jaws dropped down a few centimeters as Lee seemed to merely flicker a moment before appearing right next to Tayuya, a goofy smile on his face. Will you be my girlfriend? Naruto winced even before Tayuya placed her foot squarely in Lee's face. He was across the room in milliseconds, deepening the crater Akamaru had made only a few minutes before. What the fuck are you talking about, shit for brains? Lee climbed out of the very human-shaped crater he had formed, seemingly completely unscathed by the brutal attack. Wow. You burn with a youthful passion I have never seen before. Very well, then we shall fight instead. By now Tayuya was incredibly freaked out by this obviously brain-damaged kid, but she knew one thing: she was going to kick his ass for embarrassing her like that. Hey, it didn't even have to start the match with his signal before Tayuya was sprinting across the room, determined to get a few more blows in on the bowl cut's empty head. At least she would have done if he hadn't expertly dodged every single one of her blows without even breaking a sweat. Ah, you fight with as much passion as you speak. Yosh, you truly are a worthy foe. Tayuya's scowl merely deepened as he continued to dodge and weave through every punch or kick she sent his way. Normally that wouldn't have been aggravating. Even Tayuya knew there were people that vastly outclassed her in taijutsu. What really got to her was the fact that Lee had his hands firmly clasped behind his back the entire time. He didn't even make a single move to counter-attack or go on the offensive. Why aren't you attacking, shithead? Lee performed a graceful flip away from Tayuya, landing a few feet away, looking at her curiously. I do not understand. It would be against my code to harm such a beautiful and youthful woman. Tayuya just stared at him wide-eyed, her mouth hanging slightly open, as was Naruto's, who somehow knew there was going to be on the receiving end of Tayuya's anger after this was done. What the fuck are you talking about? How are you supposed to defeat me if you aren't even going to attack? Exclamation mark quote. Lee seemed thoughtful on her question, actually bringing a hand up to his chin to contemplate the answer. Tayuya tried to take advantage of his momentary distraction with another assault, but he once again weaved and ducked all of her blows. While her taijutsu wasn't exemplary, it was still well above average. Years of fighting Naruto had seen to that, so it was like a slight on her skills that Lee wasn't even trying to fight her. That's it, screw this. Tayuya jumped back from the engagement, already bringing her hand around to the red leather pouch she kept at the back of her belt. Before she could bring out what was inside, Lee had disappeared again and Tayuya whipped around, expecting him to appear behind her. She was still uncertain about this moral code of his. It didn't seem like a very smart idea for a shinobi to have. Your enemy wouldn't care what you considered right or wrong, so it was foolish to base your fighting style on that. Suddenly she felt pressure on her wrists, and before she knew it her arms were bound by an entire roll of ninja wire. Lee stepped back, admiring his work with gleaming smile, literally. Yosh. I did it. He turned away from Tayuya to stare up at the spectator area where more than a few people were staring at the entire scene with incredulity. Have I made you proud, Guy-sensei? The larger version of Lee with the same jumpsuit, hair, leg warmers, eyebrows and smile bounded down from the catwalk to stand across from his student. Truly an impressive match, Lee. You upheld your moral code in the honor of this young lady. He extended a thumbs up to the now slightly crying teen before leading him away from the scene. Tayuya was just left standing there with her arms tightly bound, staring wide-eyed and slack-jawed. What the fuck happened? Shithead. Get me out of this wire. I'm going to kill him. She took a step forward to run at the retreating forms of Lee and Guy, only to fall flat on her face, not realizing that her legs had been bound without her even realizing. Naruto jumped down onto the arena floor once again, walking over to Tayuya while desperately trying to wipe off the smirk that graced his features. Tayuya stared up at him, obviously livid at being treated in such a way. Shithead, if you don't get me out of this wire in 5 seconds Naruto knew this would come back to bite him on the ass, but he just couldn't help it. Tayuya-chan, you forgot the magic words. Tayuya's eyes briefly opened shockingly wide before the right one began to twitch uncontrollably. Naruto could actually see the large vein throbbing on her forehead and the slight reddish tinge that encroached her face. Without any more delay he pulled out a kunai and swiftly cut the wire from her legs and arms. He jumped back, terrified of Tayuya's reaction now that she was free. After a few seconds he opened one eye a crack, only to see a sight that would haunt him for many nights to come. Tayuya was standing there, smiling. Naruto was frozen solid as she sauntered over, lightly brushing his side as she moved past him. Why thank you, Naruto. The Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox had never nor ever would be more terrified than he was at that exact moment. He didn't have long to dwell on all of the terrible monstrous things Tayuya surely had planned for him before the next set of names appeared on the screen. He took tentative steps back to the spectator zone even as Tenten gracefully flipped down into the arena, shortly followed by Gaara in his personalized sand shunshin. Naruto stayed away from Tayuya when he got up into the viewing area, making sure to keep Lee in between him and her at all times. He figured she might take out some of her anger on Lee before she eventually got to him. Honorable? No. Potentially life-saving? Maybe. However, she continued to confuse him by acting okay with the whole thing, continuing to send him smiles that chilled him to his very core. This was almost as bad as the punishment she was no doubt concocting right at that very moment. He tried to take his mind off of it and turned his attention to the fight at hand, only to see exactly what he expected. Gaara was wiping the floor with Tenten, almost literally. His various sand-fueled attacks would send the older girl skidding across the arena floor. She would try and counter with impressive displays of aerial and ranged combat, but ultimately it was useless. No matter how good her aim was, all of the multitude of weapons she threw merely embedded in or bounced off of Gaara's sand defense. Perfect aim meant nothing if something intercepted the attack. Eventually, however impossible it may have seemed, the girl ran out of weapons. In this situation she may have resorted to taijutsu or maybe ninjutsu if the situation called for it, but she managed to show great intelligence and humility by forfeiting the match. By this point Naruto was practically squirming under the psychological torture Tayuya was putting him through. He couldn't take it anymore and was already walking towards her before he really even knew what his legs were doing. Please Tayuya. I'm sorry, so just get it over with. Stop torturing me like this. Tayuya just smirked at him, finally dropping the sickly sweet smile as she casually pointed to the selection board. If Naruto had been slightly more coherent, he would have realized that 16 competitors had already fought, leaving only him and the last member of Hinata's team. He groaned as Tayuya smirked again, motioning with her eyes to the arena floor where the other boy had already made his way to. He sighed wearily, at least the fight would take his mind off of Tayuya for a while, he hoped. He was grumbling something incoherent as he jumped down to the floor of the arena in a fluid movement that broke the impact of the drop. He walked over to the other kid, still mumbling under his breath before he was at the required distance away from his new opponent. He looked up and reaffirmed his earlier assessment of the kid: average. There just wasn't anything remarkable about this kid whatsoever. Average brown hair, average clothes, average height and build for a shinobi. It was like he was so average that it was a feature in of itself. Unnervingly enough, he even smelt average, just with a hint of damp earth. He sighed and rolled his neck. Hopefully that meant his skills were average as well. The other boy seemed to size him up as well, running his eyes over Naruto's ready stance and bored, distracted expression. Hey kid, what's your name? Naruto seemed to catch Mr. Average off with the remark. Huh. Naruto smirked. It was always so fun playing with people. Your name. That thing people use to refer to you. What is it? He spoke slowly as if speaking to a simpleton, and that only seemed to enrage the boy before him. What the hell is it to you? Naruto smirked again. He was playing right into his hands. I have a list of all the people I wipe the floor with, and I like to use names instead of descriptions. Once again the other boy just got angrier with the comment. Hibiki Saito. Add that to your new list of people who kicked your ass. Naruto smiled broadly. He couldn't help it. Seeing the other combatants so riled up was just brilliant. Not only would it knock off his focus, it would also serve to amuse Naruto as the fight progressed. What could he say? More than a few of Kyuubi's traits rubbed off on him, and Naruto liked to play with his food. Naruto's smirk immediately dropped from his face as soon as Hayate jumped backwards, initiating combat. Neither of them moved, and that might have annoyed Naruto if he wasn't as patient as he was. He had hoped to provoke Hibiki enough to make him initiate, but it wasn't a total loss. Now at least he had the opening move. He quickly channeled chakra to his hands and the seals there that quickly appeared on his skin. Instantly a kunai appeared in each of his hands and were quickly thrown in Hibiki's direction. Naruto furrowed his brow when Hibiki merely seemed to blur for a moment, and the kunai that would have hit his head and heart respectively merely passed through him. Instantly Naruto thought clone and whirled around, only for there to be nobody there. He carefully turned back around, not letting Hibiki out of his line of sight. The supposed clone smelled like him. Clones weren't usually that accurate. Just to check, Naruto once again channeled chakra through his hands and into the seals on his wrists. 6 more kunai were ejected, and after each appeared he threw them, perfectly on target. Each one merely passed through Hibiki as he continued to look amused at the display. Naruto gave his own smirk, not letting his opponent know that he was frustrated by this new turn of affairs. This time he activated a slightly different seal and another kunai popped out into his hand. This time he threw lower. The kunai still passed through Hibiki but it embedded itself in the concrete a few meters behind him. The other boy only heard the hissing in time to throw himself out of the way of the blast the exploding tag made. Naruto smiled broadly. At least he knew it definitely wasn't some kind of clone. His eyes opened wide at remembering something Tayuya had once told him about genjutsus and immediately clasped his hands together. Kai. He watched Hibiki get to his feet on the other side of the arena and laugh in a mocking fashion in Naruto's direction. No, it isn't a genjutsu, merely an ability of mine. Naruto waited for him to elaborate. When he didn't, Naruto dropped down into his taijutsu stance, down on all fours much like the Inuzuka style. Hibiki also dropped into a more traditional stance with his legs spread for maximum balance and stability. Naruto rushed him, causing the other boy to momentarily gawk at how fast the blonde came at him only to recover at the last second and blur. Naruto's fist passed straight through the other boy but he didn't stop there. As soon as one of his hands met the ground he used his hidden claws to pivot on a dime and send a vicious kick Hibiki's way. Once again the boy merely performed that irritating blur and Naruto passed right through him. Naruto was beginning to piece together what was happening but needed one more test just to be sure. For a final time he spun on the ground, this time staying upright on his hands like an acrobat. He used his legs like a normal fighter used their arms and lashed out in very punch-like motions. Each time he normally would have made contact Hibiki just did that irritating blur. At least he did until Naruto suddenly stopped one of his kicks while it was still occupying the same space the Hibiki's head should have. He felt a satisfying smack on his leg that sent Hibiki reeling away from him, clutching the side of his head in pain. Naruto gracefully jumped up from his walking handstand to look across at the now much angrier Leaf Nin. He had at least confirmed his suspicions then. So it's some kind of vibration. It was more a comment than a question but Hibiki nodded, his eyes still burning at Naruto. Yeah, that's right, I can expel chakra from my tenketsu on either side of my body, moving myself enough to dodge blows and weapons. His eyes narrowed as his mouth once again molded into a sneering smile. It also has other uses too. Hibiki suddenly rushed Naruto, flipping the tables on him to invert how their match had begun. Naruto was now on the receiving end of a volley of quick and precise punches. He dodged them fairly easily but he quickly saw the problem when he blocked an uppercut with his forearm. He flinched from the contact and had to jump back a few feet to see why his arm now suddenly hurt so much. He rolled up his sleeve while still moving back from Hibiki only to see a large red welt on his arm that resembled a friction burn. Yeah, like I said, it has other uses. I can use the tenketsu on my arms to vibrate them so fast I can literally burn you as I hit you. Naruto tried to keep the emotion out of his face but it was growing difficult to hide his frustration at this fight. He couldn't use thrown weapons, conventional attacks and now even blocking was out. He didn't want to use any of his heavy hitters this early on in the exams, there needed to be some mystery later on in the matches to ensure his promotion. Okay, maybe he could let one go but how was he supposed to use it? There was some rubble lying around from Kiba and Sasuke's fight, yes that might work, now to get Hibiki into a situation where he was cut off from his planning as his opponent chose that time to suddenly begin attacking him again. Naruto was now rather hard-pressed, all he could do was dodge and occasionally counter-attack when he could. Of course all of his own attacks merely passed through the irritating boy. Hibiki had learned from his mistake, now when Naruto stopped his punches and kicks midway he would not only blur but dodge as well. Naruto though that he might be able to simply outlast the other boy, his enormous chakra reserves might allow it. He threw that plan out quickly. For this boy to reject chakra out of his tenketsu in the amounts he was using he must have his own large supply, even if Naruto's was bigger the match would still be a long one. The longer it went on the more likely he was to make a mistake that Hibiki would capitalize on. No, this needed to end soon. Of course fate was in an argumentative mood that day so Hibiki chose that moment to reveal yet another use for that handy-dandy chakra expulsion. 1 minute Naruto was fighting and dodging relentless attacks from one Hibiki, the next thing he knew there were two. Of course his natural reaction was clone but when they both started attacking him in tandem and he could actually feel the air move from both their punches he treated them both as real. He jumped back for some respite, not that he showed he was taking a breather with his confident stance and determined look. It was then that he noticed the blur both Hibikis possessed and it clicked. His eyes narrowed while Hibiki's opened in amusement and mock innocence. Oh, you only just worked it out. Naruto snarled a little at the mocking question. Use number 3, I can vibrate my entire body between two places, effectively doubling myself. As if to demonstrate, the blurs on both boys became more pronounced as they seemed to merge back into one Hibiki. Pretty useful when facing multiple opponents or even just to corner one if I do say so myself. Hibiki's cocky and victorious look turned into one of frustration as he finally noticed Naruto's smile. Naruto started laughing, a chuckle at first, but it quickly became louder, making Hibiki sneer from pure irritation. He half thought that one of his blows had connected and he had knocked a few of Naruto's bolts loose. Eventually the blonde settled down and looked across at his opponent, a large grin still plastered on his face. You know, that's an awful lot of trouble to go through to double yourself. Hibiki's irritated look turned into one of confusion as Naruto straightened himself out. Here, I'm in a good mood today, so I'm going to teach you a better way. Hibiki continued to look frustrated and puzzled at the lesson Naruto was giving him. He was so focused that he completely missed the piece of rubble behind him silently henge back into a perfect clone of Naruto. They're called shadow clones. With that, the Naruto behind Hibiki thrust out his fist and punched the other boy squarely in the back of his head, knocking him out cold. The original Naruto smiled and walked over to his counterpart. They shared a high five before walking back to the spectator area with their arms wrapped around the other's shoulder. Everybody was looking at him, shocked at first then curious. The senseis and higher-level jonin were especially riveted to him, wondering how a mere genin was able to learn such a high-ranked and chakra-consuming jutsu. Of course, Naruto's good mood immediately evaporated as soon as he emerged from the stairs to see Tayuya smiling at him. The shadow clone dispersed and the real Naruto secretly wished that he could vanish like that. Well, he could, but that wasn't the point. Luckily, he was saved from anything Tayuya wanted to do. The winners of the matches were called down into the arena to discuss the placements for the real finals. The Sandaime Hokage and Hayate explained to them about the matches 1 month from now and their placement. The first match would be Naruto versus Neji, followed by Shino versus Dosu. That would be one side of the bracket. The other side would be Shikamaru versus Lee, followed by Sasuke versus Gaara. The winners of each match would then fight one another until it was just 2 combatants, one from each side of the brackets. Naruto did some of the work in his head. That meant he would fight Neji, then Dosu or Shino, followed by whoever won on the other side of the bracket. He smirked. That would be Gaara. There was little doubt about that, and he was glad. It would suck to have to fight Gaara earlier on. It would mean less of a chance to show off their skills. He was sad that Tayuya wouldn't progress, but there were exams every 6 months, so she would get another shot soon enough. Luckily, other hidden villages weren't quite so team-oriented with their Chunin selection. It meant that Tayuya could go at it alone. Gaara and Naruto would be Chunin themselves by then, so they couldn't help her even if they wanted to. He smiled as the finalists dispersed, all ready to train for a month in preparation for the next fights. He gave one last look at all his potential opponents, as that was what they were. In the end, he could end up fighting any one of them. However, for now, Neji was his main focus. He would need to find a way around his Juoken attacks and that rotation move he had seen. He figured he could talk to Hinata about that. She would understand his style better than most. As for the rotation, he was going to have to do some sparring with Gaara. If anybody understood an ultimate impenetrable defense, it was him. Next on the list was Dosu. The sound attacks from his gauntlet were the priority. Naruto would have to damage it immediately. Shino may prove more difficult. He didn't fully understand how his bugs worked, so that was another thing he was going to have to find out. Lee was a simple one, a generic taijutsu master that would be fairly easy to overcome as long as he didn't have any tricks up his sleeves. Shikamaru was the mystery of the other bracket. Naruto guessed he was the tactician sort, but with only those shadow jutsu to back him up, his arsenal was hardly varied. Finally, there was Sasuke. Then again, Naruto didn't have to worry about him much, as he would be Gaara's first opponent. He smirked to himself as he and Gaara rejoined Tayuya. This time Naruto averted his gaze from the redhead, knowing that she couldn't unnerve him with that smile if he couldn't see it. Even so, he could feel her gaze boring into the back of his head as he walked, and it was becoming unbearable. He managed to stay silent until all 3 of them were out of the forest of death and were on their way back to the Inuzuka compound. He didn't know how, but he could feel that Tayuya hadn't stopped looking at him the entire way back. Finally, he crumbled and turned suddenly, once again cringing at the sight of Tayuya's smile. Okay, I'm sorry Tayuya, I promise I will make it up to you, I swear. He quickly turned back around and dashed off in the direction of the Inuzuka compound, leaving behind a startled but pleased Tayuya and a bemused Gaara. You enjoy manipulating him like that, don't you? It wasn't really a question, but Tayuya smiled anyway. Yup. Gaara just looked at her, his own smirk beginning to develop. You know, some people would call that sadism. Tayuya beamed at him like he had given her the best compliment imaginable before she stuck her tongue out childishly and sprinted off after Naruto. Gaara just sighed, but his smile didn't diminish. Naruto wasn't the only one glad to see that Tayuya had come out of the whole affair in the forest unchanged. With the faint smile still set on his face, he too ran off after the two fleeting forms of his friends. A haunting melody drifted throughout the Inuzuka compound. Many of the Ninken and their handlers paused at the unfamiliar sound. They turned their heads trying to find the source, but the music bounced off too many surfaces, making it almost untraceable. Naruto didn't need to trace it, he already knew where Tayuya would be. She always chose the same kind of spots to practice and play in, usually tall trees. He rounded the side of the house they were staying into the tree where he did pull-ups in the mornings. Sure enough, there she was, sat up in the highest stable bough of the tree with the thin metal flute balanced delicately in her hands as her nimble fingers danced across the air holes. The melody was long and drawn out, mournful yet not entirely sad, keeping him riveted as he merely stood and listened to the beautiful tune. Naruto couldn't believe he had agreed to let Tayuya drag him around all day. He wasn't exactly sure what he had done, but for this kind of punishment it must have been something bad. It was a scorching day in Suna. Even the most weather-hardened of the natives were preferring to spend the day inside. As it was, Naruto had no such luxury as he traipsed after Tayuya with a bundle of clothes, acting as his repayment for the wrong. He had tried to get Gaara to come as well, but the reserved sand wielder had merely looked at him like he was crazy. Nowadays Gaara used times like these for long, enjoyable lie-ins. They had only been residents of Suna for 2 years, and Gaara's relationship with Shukaku fixed for lesser, but Naruto and Tayuya already knew the winding streets like the backs of their hands. They used this to their advantage as they walked through the most shaded areas of the streets and alleyways that would provide the most protection on a day like this. Tayuya may not have been girly in the traditional sense of the word, but she was still a girl. As such, most of the shops they visited were for clothes. Naruto normally would have been fine with that. Clothes shopping wasn't so bad. It was just the fact that half the time they wouldn't even buy anything. Even so, and Naruto would happily admit it if asked, he did enjoy the time with Tayuya. Recently the two non-Wind County natives hadn't much time alone with each other. Again, that wasn't something Naruto minded all that much. In the few years they had known Gaara, he had grown into a fast friend. However, Naruto almost missed the days when it was just him and Tayuya together. He genuinely enjoyed her company. It didn't help at all that Temari would tease them to no end about their sleeping arrangement. It still frustrated Naruto that people would even bring it up. After all, it was private between them and he didn't even see what the problem was. He was cut out from his own thoughts when he realized that Tayuya's hand had slipped out from his own. He briefly panicked, only to sigh in relief when he saw she was just gazing into a storefront off to his left. He wandered over and peeked into the store over her shoulder, looking at the strange devices and shapes that were inside. Most were made out of gleaming metals in various shades of either bronze or silver, but a few were wooden. He looked up at the store name hanging over the door. It proudly read, Instruments of Wind. Naruto didn't get the pun as he looked over the variety of musical instruments that adorned the various shelves and racks. He could see more than a few stringed instruments, which only confused him concerning the name. He made a move to see if Tayuya wanted to move on, only to turn and see that she had vanished again. He spun around only to catch a glimpse of vibrant red hair now inside the store. When he followed her in, she was standing by a display case looking down at the various metal flutes that lay inside. She possessed a look that Naruto had never seen on Tayuya's features before. If he didn't know any better, he might have said it was awe. He looked over her shoulder at the flutes, not really understanding why she looked that way. Music had never particularly interested him before. She had one just like it. Tayuya shocked him by whispering the words almost reverently, a tone she never used in really any situation. Who? Tayuya jumped a little, as if she hadn't actually expected anybody to be next to her. Never mind, answer her whispered revelation. When she saw it was just Naruto, she relaxed visibly but bit her lip. She only did that when she was unsure about talking about her past. While they had certainly grown closer over time, there were things that they both still kept to themselves, especially concerning their pasts. Back in Earth Country there was this woman. Naruto could tell this was difficult to talk about for her and unconsciously moved his hand to hold hers. She was slightly confused by the gesture but appreciative nonetheless, drawing comfort from Naruto's warm hand. She wasn't like all of the other parents, she didn't have any kids. Tayuya took a deep breath. Naruto kept quiet, allowing the girl to talk at her own pace. Well, she did, but, well, she never told me what happened to them, but she always seemed really sad when I asked. While neither said anything, they both knew exactly what that meant, even if she hadn't at the time. One time when my grandfather got really bad, drank more than usual, I was scared so I ran away. I didn't know where I was going and it was dark, so I kept tripping over things. Eventually I heard music, I didn't know why but I followed it. It was the old woman and she was playing a flute. She paused to look at the case again, a flute just like that one. Naruto could see she was indicating towards one of the plainer flutes in the cabinet, no less elegant or finely made than the others but with only a single color and no engravings. It was rather simple. It was solid, matte silver with a number of air holes spaced seemingly randomly along its length. He looked back to Tayuya, who simply stared at the instrument, unmoving like a statue. After that I would go to her house and she would play for me, said she didn't care what all the other parents thought. Naruto couldn't believe what he was seeing. A single tear edged its way out of the corner of Tayuya's eye and lazily dropped down her cheek. She made no move to wipe the offending droplet away and it just followed the contours of her face before hanging onto her chin a moment and dropping to the floor with a muted splash. What happened to her? Naruto said it as softly as he could, but Tayuya once again flinched when she heard his voice. While he liked that Tayuya was opening up to him and revealing more about her past, he definitely didn't like seeing her in this state. I don't know, when I left by now a few more tears had escaped Tayuya's eyes, but not her notice. She profusely wiped them with her sleeve before straightening up and sniffing back what hadn't made it through her defenses. No sense talking about the past though, shithead. She looked up at him, her usual defiant gleam back in her eyes, almost disappointing Naruto. Come on, there are a few stores I wanna check out, you still owe me after all. Without anything further she spun on her heel and left the store. Naruto's eyes darted between her retreating form and the display case that had so riveted her attention. A determined look entered his eye along with the faintest hints of a smile as he looked over to the bored-looking clerk behind the store's counter. Hey mister, how much is one of these flutes? Tayuya's haunting melody finally drifted to a stop, so gently it was almost difficult to determine when the song ended and the normal sounds of nature began. Naruto hadn't even realized that his mouth had subconsciously fixed itself into a faint grin. He always loved hearing Tayuya play. It wasn't so much because he enjoyed the music, even though it in itself was beautiful. It was more to do with the fact that he could tell how happy it made her every time her fingers danced across its metal surface. Oi shithead, you gonna stare all day like some kind of pervert? He chuckled to himself. Tayuya always had the most eloquent ways of snapping him out of his various daydreams. He hopped up into the bough Tayuya was now lazily sitting on, her back up against the trunk. She eyed him curiously with a hint of aggression to which he already knew the reason, and before she could do anything he quickly whipped out a scroll from his back pocket. Without further invitation he channeled some chakra and unsealed the contents. With a flash of smoke a plate quickly appeared atop the scroll. Tayuya's eyes widened a bit as she gazed down on the food on top of said plate. There lay an impressively large pile of dango, still steaming from being freshly grilled. You got me dango. Naruto grinned broadly. Not just any dango, your favorite dango. Tayuya looked at him skeptically, despite the still warm evidence in front of her. You couldn't have. Hanami dango is impossible to get this time of year. Naruto just shrugged innocently with a playful smile still glued on his face. Tayuya took one last look between him and the food on the plate before cautiously bringing it onto her lap. She only reveled in the dreamy smell that wafted up to her nose for a few seconds before happily digging into her favorite food. Hanami dango was notoriously difficult to find outside of sakura viewing season, more so in wind country when there weren't even any sakura trees in the first place. I hope thsisg and gal mu gt far mg. Naruto stifled a laugh from Tayuya trying to eat with her mouth full, too busy shoveling down the delicious dumpling to care for trivialities like manners. She gulped down her last mouthful to make some room before repeating herself. I hope this isn't all you got for me. Naruto shrugged as he went back to her food. In truth, he had hoped this would be enough. It usually made up for most of his wrongs. He just chuckled. This was why he always had a plan B. Nope. Tayuya looked at him curiously, still with a mouth full of the snack as he motioned with his hand towards the Hokage monument. She looked but didn't see anything out of the ordinary, or at least she didn't until Naruto made a hand seal. The Hokage monument seemed to blur ever so slightly for a moment. When the illusion dissipated, Tayuya nearly lost her current mouthful. Do you like it? Tayuya looked on at what Naruto had done as an apology with wide, disbelieving eyes. All over the Hokage's faces was bright, multicolored paint done in random swirls. She even noted that the fourth now bore whisker markings not unlike Naruto's own, which gave them a strange resemblance. Naruto looked on at his female companion worriedly, afraid that she wouldn't appreciate all the work that had gone into that prank. He let out a sigh of relief when Tayuya burst out laughing, just managing to avoid spraying her dango all over the ground below them. His own smile broke out as he was allowed to revel in the unspoken praise of his handiwork. After a while of laughter, Tayuya just turned to him, still wiping the odd laughter-induced tear from her eyes. How the fuck did you manage that, shithead? Naruto just shrugged. It had actually been surprisingly easy to set up a large henge over the monument. Well, he said easy, it was only his enormous chakra reserves that had stopped him passing out. The hard part was remembering where exactly he had painted already so he wouldn't go over what he'd already done by mistake. Honestly, he had expected Anbu to swarm him as soon as he tried to set up the scaffolding. Maybe they just thought he was a cleaner. Please tell me that's long-lasting paint. Naruto just shook his head sheepishly and Tayuya sighed. Naruto was a good prankster, but sometimes he just didn't take it far enough for her liking. Nah, it'll come off with the rain. He didn't want to be offensive after all, he only did it to see Tayuya smile, so mission accomplished, he guessed. Oh well, nice work anyway, shithead. She motioned to the now empty plate of dango and the new additions to the monument. I guess that'll do. Naruto smiled broadly again as Tayuya pulled him closer to her on the branch. She hated how cold it got her in Fire Country. It was just strange to her considering the name. They sat like that and talked for a while longer, only coming down when Gaara finally came looking for them. Naruto was glad for the momentary distraction and fun. The next month was going to be filled with training, and yes, prank training. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.